Aaron Walker, what's the word, sir?
The word is happy.
I like that. Good. Thanks for joining the Square Pizza Pod today.
Thank you for having me.
And where are you coming from in the world today?
I am in New Orleans, Louisiana. You know, coming to you from my office/bedroom these days.
Yeah, well, it's just as good as my office/kitchen. So we're all the same. Anything good happening in New Orleans?
Oh, it's summertime, so it's hot.
Yep.
Which I don't mind heat, but it's like the humidity that really gets you. It's like 90% humidity at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're just like, ugh.
Yeah,
But it's all good.
cutting through. We enjoy having you on today, and Kelsey's been, to our listening audience, a little MIA on some other projects, but always a pleasure to have her back. Kelsey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me again, even though I've been absent.
Always. Anytime we can get you, we'll have you. So Aaron, really excited to have you, man. And I think like we've kind of sent you before and talked about, we'd like to kind of start the podcast with hopefully some fun, interesting facts that are either true or false based upon our Googling and our stalking of said guest.
Yeah.
And what turned out for you most consistently was either your love or disdain for sneaker culture. I got conflicting responses. So would love to just hear you ruminate on that for a little bit.
Well, I do like sneakers.
Okay.
I suppose, some people have a midlife crisis and they buy cars.
Yep.
And I think my version of that is buying sneakers.
Midlife is a little bit of a reach. I mean, you're 34, right?
I'm not all the way there to just yet. We'll see. I don't know. I think, my daily wardrobe is pretty simple. And so to me, like shoes are the sort of personality that I choose to bring to my wardrobe. And I just think like if I'm going to spend a lot of money on sneakers, then let me buy sneakers I love and love like a lot of the collaborations that are happening in sneaker culture right now.
Okay.
I tried to get the Nike came out with this collaboration with Ben and Jerry, the Chunky Dunkies.
Yep.
And they were sold out in like 4 minutes. I couldn't get them. And I'm just like, if I'm going to spend money on sneakers, like I want to get something that just feels unique. And so I'm always just like looking for opportunities to just sort of bring my style and personality to the shoe game.
Where do you fall in the like Yeezy spectrum of sneaker game?
When you say it again, what do you mean easy?
Like Kanye shoes?
Oh, yeah. I think those are ugly.
Okay. Yeah, checking.
There's some
you gotta have an opinion. Yeah.
Sustainability issues with the shoes as well.
Environmental, good.
As in the Yeezys, or just like generally shoes?
Shoes in general. But let's not. Well, we won't steer the conversation that way. But I'm sure you saw that he signed like a deal with Gap, which, Gap has like a whole history of like not paying their garment workers, especially now during COVID times, and just an interesting conversation to have about.
Fair.
And so you said midlife crisis, but is that legit, or have shoes always been a thing for you, like since being a kid?
Not since a kid. I mean, I'd say 5 or 6 years ago, I just thought to myself, I think for me, like 2 items I've decided are going to make my wardrobe, which are like great coats and jackets and great shoes. And then to me, it's like I wear some version of jeans and a top basically every day, And so my version of bringing style to it is the shoes and the coat or the jacket. And so probably in like the last 5 or 6 years, I've gotten really into it.
I appreciate like the practicality and the focus on that. I've like thought a lot about like someone who's like pretty cheap on my end, like buying higher quality things that I use every day. So like a mattress or better shoes, or things like that. So I feel you on that a little bit.
My wife gets mad at me, like not sneakers, but I have these one pair of boots, and she's like, you get more compliments on your shoes than I do when we're in the airport. And I'm like, because that's all you need. You just need a good pair of shoes and a good coat.
The go-to, yeah. I mean, I guess you may have to clear that with like your partner to some extent. Be like, two of these things are going to be really fly and dope no matter what. The others, like, you're just going to have to roll with, and hopefully like, the significant other is cool with like that acceptance.
She's flying all the other ways, so she's willing to give me that.
Good answer. Yeah. All right, man. So I know, like, we were fortunate to connect through Vince and Rashid and the guys previously with the fellowship, and now launching Summer House. And so, appreciate getting to know you, but also just like doing some more stalking on your LinkedIn and other things. You really started in this work and kind of thinking about education differently. I was as a teacher in Philly with TFA, but then I think went to attorney, then this really cool position around portfolio director with the Fund for Public Schools in NYC, which seems cool for a number of reasons. So I guess just like take us through what it was like teaching to attorney to that position in New York.
Yeah. I mean, I started teaching in 2003.
Okay.
I went to the University of Virginia and was a foreign affairs major and thought that I would have some, great career in like the State Department. But and after my first year of college, I had an internship in Harlem at this place called Harlem RBI.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like the best summer job that I had. And that experience stuck with me for 4 years. And I said, like I've got this degree, but I really want to go do something with education. And so applied to TFA, got in, and then moved to Philly to teach high school. So I taught 9th grade in West Philly. And like a lot of people, you have no idea what to expect. So
Yep.
you just kind of jump into it. And then, in many ways, it's like the hardest job that I've ever had. And I think the thing that I learned teaching, well, I learned a couple things. One is, you think it's just you and, the four walls of your classroom, like you're sort of, in some movie, but really teaching is a collective effort, right? It is you and the children, it is you and their families, it is you and your colleagues. And so, I think that was just sort of a lesson to me that, yes, you have to sort of bring your A game every day, but that the way the system works is when everyone's working together. And I feel like the times when I was doing my best teaching, when our team was doing our best teaching, is when we were working together. And so I think that was like a lesson that I learned early on. And then also just the importance of leadership, I mean, on two levels. One is, being 22, standing in front of the classroom, like you can't hide, like every day you have to lead.
Were you high school?
I taught 9th grade English, yeah.
Yeah, so I taught high school. Yeah, so 22 and 18, 19-year-olds, and they can tell that you're about in the same age. Like, I am not listening. Like, you got to earn that respect more than anything else.
That's right. And they were. I mean, in 9th grade, to me, at least for me, was the best year because they were in high school, but because it was their first year, they still had enough of like the middle school innocence in them still. Like they hadn't been completely jaded by what high school can be sometimes.
That's right.
But yeah.
And you grew up in Philly, is that true or no?
So I grew up in Jersey.
Jersey.
Like the part of New Jersey that is, essentially like the suburb of New York City.
Okay. Cool. So then attorney after teaching, and then portfolio director. So like walk us through that progression of like, powerful experience in education, said peace out, forget the kids, going to be attorney, and then said psych, and then went to NYC.
Yeah. So, TFA is a 2-year commitment.
Yep.
I told myself I was going to say 3, and I actually really considered teaching as a career. I didn't go into it thinking like this is something I want to do to just like jump to something else.
Yep.
I taught English in a high school that had no library. I taught high school at a school that technically was a magnet school in Philadelphia, but yet most of my kids were reading below grade level.
What school in West Philly? Sorry, I should ask.
It was a school called Parkway West High School.
Yeah. I did an internship in Philly my junior year in college, but visited Strawberry Mansion High School when it was still open, which is how I found out about TFA, because we visited like 2 or 3 classrooms with similar. I remember kids sharing textbooks, so they didn't have enough textbooks for all the kids, so like grouping and desks to share one.
Yep. Yep. And so, what I sort of came to the conclusion, I sort of came to this conclusion at the end of my 2 years, that like every day we're asking teachers to perform these heroic tasks to give young people a basic education. And I don't even mean that in, as disparaging like the really hard work that teachers do and that, my colleagues did every day. But if I'm looking at it, at least from my perspective, objectively, it's just like we weren't even providing them with anything extraordinary. And I just thought to myself, like, this is unsustainable. I mean, you may have um, incidents where with a certain student or a certain year, you can sort of overcome all the obstacles in your way. But, I just sort of came to this conclusion that it was a systemic issue. And for some reason, I thought law school was the way to help me understand that system. And I think some of it was, in the early aughts, there was this drumbeat of education being the civil rights movement in my generation. And I thought, well, civil rights, that means you like go to law school and you just like fix the laws and you change the policies. And so, I wrote all my law school essays on my teaching experience, why I want to go to law school, not to make money, not to work at a big law firm, but, because I really was passionate about this issue of education. I wanted to understand why wasn't education a fundamental right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the reason I went to law school, to sort of figure that question out. I did, figure it out in my first year when I was in my common law class, and the professor made us read this Supreme Court case, San Antonio v. Rodriguez, that came down in 1972, where the Supreme Court said education not a fundamental right. I was like, oh, well, I guess I got 3 more years. So,
Sad, but yeah.
what am I gonna do? But all jokes aside, I would still do it again. I think law school. I made great friends. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about sort of how to think that I think has really helped me in the last 10 years.
And then that took you to New York for kind of this, like, which sounds like a really interesting position, which you were supporting the school district, I think actually employed by the school district, but raising money from outside, maybe to make it more sustainable for teachers based upon your own teaching experience.
Yeah. So just to fill in one gap, and then I'll jump to the Fund for Public Schools, is like a lot, well, not like some people, you go to law school wanting to change the world, and then you leave working at a law firm.
Yeah.
That's what I did. So I did move to New York and work at a law firm for a couple years.
Okay.
And then moved to the Fund for Public Schools. And, for me, it was an opportunity, having sort of been away from education for 5, almost 6 years at that point, to sort of jump back into the game. And this was at a time when Mike Bloomberg was still mayor in New York City, and Joel Klein was still the school's chancellor. And so this was term 3, for Mayor Bloomberg and Joel Klein together as like this duo running the biggest education department in the city. And so I had this opportunity to sort of jump in and run one of these portfolios. And for me, it was interesting because it was an opportunity to sort of see how can we use private dollars to fund innovation for education. So it was less like, hey, we need to put money we need to put computers in the back of the classroom. It was like, how can we use private dollars to seed innovative ideas, new school models, new technologies that could have system level change?
Yep. Did it work?
Yes and no. I mean, like any investor, you're wrong more than you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as smart as we were, that we were wrong more than we were right. And so, I mean, that's good and bad, right? It is a fact of sort of betting on early stage ideas. At the same time, you have to recognize that, teachers are teaching every day, and students are going to school every day. And, our job is to, use the resources that we have to make sure that they are learning and can sort of fulfill their life potential. And, I think with a district of 1.1 million students, we did the best that we could, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
Not trying to make you pick favorites or anything, but is there something that you're most proud of from that time period?
Yeah, there was well, can I pick two?
Of course. Pick three if you want.
Just two. So one, when I was there, we seeded the first P-Tech school. So partnered with,
that stands for?
I'm gonna forget now. I want to say it's like Pathways in Education, Pathways in Tech, something like that. But the acronym was P-Tech, and it was an early college high school model. So students are able to. It's a high school where students were able to earn a high school diploma, but also a bachelor or associate's degree in 5 years, but within high school, and also sort of put them on a path to be an entry-level employee at IBM. And sort of being able to sort of see how that has grown over time and how that model has proliferated to a lot of different states across the country, and what that can mean for the path to work, particularly for young students of color, I think was one of my favorite projects. And then we also funded, at the time it was called School of One, now it's called New Classrooms. It was essentially a middle school math model, like a personalized learning middle school math model that was sort of a model of technology, but sort of human-centered learning, where kids essentially each kid was on their own path based on like these algorithms that the founders had built. And so it was just exciting to sort of see how you could use technology to personalize learning for students. And I remember their very first pilots at these schools in Brooklyn, and to sort of see where they are now is exciting.
And both are still going or in operation in some capacity?
Yeah, they're both still going. I'm not in touch with it as much as I probably should be, but based on my LinkedIn feed, they're doing quite well.
I mean, I think above all that, like the cool thing is just you leading it, but also the other leaders in the city creating space to even test and innovate, and think a lot about like 1.1 million is a lot in that district, but any district, but knowing you probably have to take small bets or small risks to figure out what scales first. Cool to hear that you guys have the latitude and the ability to test those things, where I think in so many other districts around our country, even now, that testing isn't happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's, there have been analogs to this Fund for Public Schools model that have popped up in different cities like DC and Chicago. And I think that, one of the benefits, and I get it, right? People don't want tax dollars being used to sort of figure out ideas. And so I think the beauty of this model was that we were able to use private dollars to do that. And then when things worked, then you can sort of roll those things onto the public dollar.
Is it because you think like R&D, research and development, is a common term in the private sector that most people are used to and understanding what works, where like putting that on the ballot to vote is a bigger hill to climb?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, we as a country have debates over whether tax dollars should, things that we think government should be doing, where that money should go, let alone, sort of testing new ideas. And then particularly in a place like education, and I get it, like it's really sensitive to start talking about R&D when it pertains to education, because again, there are real people who are behind that, and particularly sort of given the history of the United States in terms of quote unquote experimentation with people of color. We have to like sort of really be cognizant of that history and what that means.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So then, there may be some additional gaps, but and fill those in, but definitely want to transition to Camelback so you can tell that story. I think from our end, like we've been fans of you and the work for so long, given your guys' focus, given the type of work and the leaders you're supporting and incubating. And then even super micro example, but down to the manifesto on the webpage, which is beyond cool, but also just important for so many reasons. So I'd love to just have you kind of tell the people about Camelback, how you launched it, and what else we should know about it.
Yeah. Camelback is the third thing that I started. So, and I don't think Camelback would have existed if not for the first two failures to quasi failures. And you don't know it at the time, but it's oftentimes the failures and the things that don't work out that sort of prepare you for the thing that will. And so I think for me, Camelback was born for a couple of reasons. One is having been an entrepreneur in different situations, realizing just the lack of access to coaching, capital, and connections, in particular, that founders of color face, and saying, I think genius is equally distributed, but access is not. How can I create a place and a platform to elevate the genius that's already there, particularly in a space like education, where oftentimes a lot of these organizations and ideas are pointed towards communities of color. And to me, the unwritten suggestion is that oftentimes communities of color are always the problem, but never the solution. And to me, that wasn't my belief set. And so, what could I do to sort of fill that, to fill that gap? So, started Camelback in 2013. And spent the summer writing a couple concept papers. And I think one of the lessons I learned in my first couple of ventures is that companies don't live on paper, they live in the real world. And so I remember my first company idea was like version 28 of the concept paper, trying to perfect it. And I'm like, well, I'm going to write a couple of these, because I do think, putting some thought work in is worthwhile. And then we just got started in the fall. I said, again, I think all entrepreneurs need the same three things: coaching, capital, and connections. I found 5 entrepreneurs in New York City who are working on education ideas, who are of color, and said, I don't have any money to give you. I barely have any money myself, so I don't have any capital, but I will be your coach, and I will sort of use the connections I had developed in the last 10 years to help them. And we worked with them for 4 months. And that pilot went all right. It wasn't perfect, but, we helped one founder. He was trying to teach himself how to code, to build a prototype. We partnered with a coding school where the students, they had a capstone project. So his prototype became the capstone for a couple of students, and they built the prototype in 6 weeks. And then he had paying customers 6 weeks later.
That's awesome.
So we told stories like that, and we said, look what we did with my money, which is not saying much because I am not independently wealthy. Imagine what I could do with your money. And so we were able to get 3, big national funders to sort of believe in that vision. And we raised $1 million. It took about a year, but we raised $1 million. And that was sort of the jumpstart for, what is formerly known as Camelback Ventures and all the stuff that's on our website now.
Yeah, and going to that around the manifesto, like, was this a part of like the version 28 on paper that you were writing? Has this evolved? And also, like, I think I know why it's important, and I can expound on that, but I would love to hear to you, like, why it's something that lives and breathes on the website.
Yeah, the manifesto came about a couple years later. We wrote that in 2016, 2017, and it was one of those things where I had been using this model, ruthless for good, for a long time. It was this thing that had sort of like been living in my mind and in my heart since 2008.
Wow.
And I'm just like waiting for the right time to just like bring it forward. And I just thought to myself, like, what the hell am I waiting for? Like, this is, this is the thing. And so me and my colleague Amanda at the time just spent like a couple of weeks, and we just put pen to paper, like, what do we believe about the world, and what does ruthless for good mean? And that sort of became the manifesto, like this public statement of our values and sort of the world that we're trying to bring about, so that when we went out, because we have ruthless for good on our hats and on all our stuff, like what does it mean to us? And so it's just like this public declaration that lets people know sort of what we value in the world and what that phrase means to us.
That's really cool. So then tell us kind of like you've been running it for what, 5, 6, 7 years now. I'm not a math major, so forgive me if I mess that math up. But you know, we've had the pleasure of like seeing a number of groups that have come through Camelback and working with a few before and after. Is this going to be around for 200 years? Is it going to be around so every kid has access to a high quality school? Like, what's the future of Camelback in your mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think our ultimate goal is, how do we close the racial wealth gap? And it's one of those things where it's just like, how do we use entrepreneur as a lever to make sure that generational wealth is accessible for everyone?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we want to do that is through the work that we're doing with our fellows. And I can imagine on one level it's probably a far leap from working with education entrepreneurs to closing the wealth gap. And I don't think that Camelback is an organization that can or should be doing it on its own. Like our solution is not a panacea, but for me, you sort of have to ask yourself, for what? For what reason do we think it's important to invest in leaders of color? For what reason do we think it's important to invest in education? And for me, it's not just so that a kid can learn, so that a kid can go to college, so that a kid can get a job. It is this idea that the manifestation of those things will bring about a world where more and more people who have been denied access to generational wealth will have an opportunity through education, through entrepreneurship over time to achieve those things. And so, I think there was like a study that said it would like take 228 years, for the average Black family to have the same wealth as the average white family. I hope it doesn't take 228 years. I certainly won't be around for the end of that. But I think that's our end game. And in many ways, education to me is just the starting point. I mean, it's been 6, 7 years that we've been doing this. And for some people, education is like that is the beginning and end of the game. I think for us, education was an entry point into how can we use social entrepreneurship to sort of change these systems, understanding or at least believing that education is one of the critical levers.
Is that very like specific micro point with the connected to the ultimate goal? But is that like a lens in which you guys view as you're supporting like leaders, but in the ventures that they're birthing around like how this work is going to close the racial wealth gap?
Yeah. I mean, I think it influences how we think about what organizations or what companies to support. I think the value lives like within our team and the kind of companies that we're trying to build. So, one of the questions that we ask our founders is, what percent of their staff do they pay a living wage? And and I know sometimes it can be hard when you're early stage because you don't have that much money, and so maybe you're not completely living into your ideals. But on our last survey, 98% of our founders, were paying their staff a living wage, and so it's one of those things where it's not just are we churning out new organizations? It's like, what kind of organizations are we churning out, and can we use our platform to influence the values that these new organizations are going to bring forth in the world, including those kind of things.
I bet even just like setting that maybe an expectation, but just like knowing how important that is, then just clarifies that with the groups and the leaders you guys are supporting to know if it's not already high on their priority list, knowing how tough it is as you're ramping up, that it rises to the top of the priority list pretty quick. So then like you guys are, I think Kelsey's going to go. Kelsey, go ahead.
Oh, if you had something to say, go for it. I was just, okay. So we're 3-4 months into COVID now? I don't know what time that is anymore. How has that been affecting kind of the day-to-day of Camelback?
Yeah. It's my colleague we have a Slack channel on our team, and she said that there's not 7 days of the week anymore. There's just 3: yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Yeah.
How I think about the days. In In terms of how COVID has affected our day to day. So a couple of things. One is all of our programming had to go virtual. Our summit, our program is 6 months. And we let people live where they live because we feel like if you're trying to make change in your community, you should stay there. And we should try to figure out ways to work around you. And what that means, though, is we do want to bring folks together. So we have these 3 in-person summits that we do during the course of the 6 months, essentially beginning, middle, and end. This year, we had the first one in January, and then COVID hit. And so the last 2 we had to do virtually. Turning a 4-day in-person summit into a 4-day virtual summit over Zoom was a little bit of a challenge. And I think we just learned a whole lot about how you actually do professional development and adult learning on the internet. At the same time, I think it also opened our eyes up to what's possible, in terms of what's possible to do in person, what's possible to do online. And so I actually think that there will be a lot of streamlining and innovation that'll come out of this for our team in terms of what our product delivery looks like. So I'm actually, excited about that. And it's probably one of those things where, we wouldn't have done it otherwise. We would have thought, oh, this is like working just fine. Like if it's not broke, why fix it? Mm-hmm. But when you're forced to do something differently, you're like, oh, like it could actually work that way too, and sort of save us a bunch of resources along the way. So I think that's been the biggest change. We had a relatively flexible work policy to begin with, and so most people were in the office 2.5, maybe 3 days a week anyway, and so then working a couple of days, from home, and then we have 2. Our team is mainly based in New Orleans. We've got a couple folks in Denver, so they're sort of remote all the time. And so it's been a little bit of a change to sort of figure out how do you build like a remote team culture, and I think we're still in the process of figuring those things out.
Yeah, one, I got to join the Ruthless Pitches, and I thought were cool for a number of reasons. Not just cool, but one, like from a business owner saying how quickly you guys could adjust to do that and still deliver such a quality product was awesome. But then the actual fellows and leaders that were pitching and some of the ideas were awesome to hear, and also how they were adapting at the same time, because their model that they started 6 months ago was probably much different than the end product from what they were pitching.
Yeah, I was really happy with like the Ruthless Pitches this year. We, you never know how it's going to go, and a couple things happened this year that I think we've been trying to figure out for a while, which is how can you turn this into more of a conversation? Right. Because in the last several years, you do a live in-person event, everyone gets their 4 or 5 minutes, and because you're not trying to bore everyone to tears, with like a 3-hour event, you kind of run through all the pitches at once, and you don't give an opportunity for a discussion and for feedback. But this year, we created 2 virtual stages, one for our for-profit ventures and one for our nonprofit ventures. And just that split basically cut the group in half and then allowed for more interaction.
Done that.
Yeah. That allowed for more interaction with the audience. And that's sort of what we want, right? We don't want this to be a show. We want entrepreneurs to get feedback. We want, the audience to be engaged and to ask questions. And, there were several times people were like, hey, I want to help you with this. Reach out to me afterwards. And that's always what we were looking for. And you just kind of hope it happens after the pitches are over. I think this one better.
Yep. And I know, like, obviously, talking a little bit about Camelback's day-to-day adjusting, as well as like the actual programming adjusting. But given, your teaching experience in Philly and then the work in New York and now in your crystal ball, like how does COVID affect the next 10 or 100 years of education, either logistically or aspirationally?
Yeah. I'm hopeful in the sense that, this feels like a once in a century. So therefore, a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to not be beholden to all of the norms that we, sort of are afraid to let go of, just like Camelback was, holding on to. We have to do these summits in person. We have to, I think there's the same opportunity in education. And I think the question is, are we able to take advantage of that? Or are we just trying to sort of rush back to quote unquote normal, where quite frankly, normal wasn't working for most people anyway. In terms of what I think will happen, I don't know. I mean, I will say I do think that one of the greatest opportunities we have is to understand that learning can happen anywhere. And so how can we, how can we understand that, yes, learning can happen in a school, but there are so many other places that learning can happen, and how can we sort of build that into the educational experience that might, be better for kids, or excuse me, for young people in terms of their actual education, but also for families, as families are trying to navigate work and all of those things, so I've heard all kinds of ideas, maybe some kids will go to school a couple of days a week and then they'll do online for a few days. I think, obviously there has to be some sort of economic stability to be able to have kids at home. But I think for a lot of families, that's going to be a really enticing idea, just generally, less COVID. That, maybe school will be the place where core things happen, English, writing, reading, but how can we then sort of see other institutions, other nonprofits as a way to supplement what students want to do? So even thinking about some of the ventures that we've supported, I'm thinking of Yabo in Denver, the youth, I'm forgetting the name now, but Yabo.
The good one. Yep, the good one on Denver. Yep.
Where they're working with kids around media. And so they're using media as a tool for not only engagement with young people, but I think also for skill building around ELA, and, their current model was to partner with schools because everything had to happen in a school. But you could also imagine a place where it's like students do their main 3 subjects at school, but then they opt into Yabo for a semester because they want to learn podcasting, they opt into some other thing. And so learning can happen in those places. And that's a part of the core experience. That's not, an after school program or some extracurricular that you only get to opt into if your parents have, time and resources.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. It's so interesting from what we're seeing in Charlotte and North Carolina, but also in other states too. And I think it's exposing so many inequities that maybe a lot of us knew, but not maybe everybody did. But it is exposing it, both the good and the bad, in terms of like rigorous instruction coming home, or just like worksheets being printed and parents being like, well, this is what you're doing day to day. Or like, if you're doing this in 2 hours now, why the hell are you spending 7 hours at school every day? Like what's happening the other 5 hours? But then to the other extent, it's like, if we have the internet, if so much of, this curriculum is open source from high quality schools, but like my kid's school doesn't have AP or IB, like why can't my kid, take classes at home Monday, Tuesday, but then, go to get on the bus or drive or Uber to get to another school that has IB? Or I think it just like opens up so many questions around like, what are school districts? Like, are they real? What's charter? What's district? Like, how can we just now navigate what a new normal of education can look like?
Yeah, agreed.
It's opportune. It's an opportunity if I think enough system leaders currently are willing to accept that and enact on it and not race back to normal, as you said. So I think, what we talked about too, and one thing we always want to do on our podcast is like have real conversations about like the day-to-day of the future of education, which we don't think can happen without talking about equity and race. And I think timely nonetheless for things happening in our country, but things always happening in our country, but also specifically from you with your focus on Camelback, but the letter you kind of wrote, the open letter on racism and philanthropy, which was so honest and raw and real and also vulnerable from a leadership perspective. So I'd love to just hear you kind of talk about, take this up whichever way you want in terms of how race has played a part in your career. And I think specifically how you use that to put these words on paper with this recent article that we'll link to in the show notes. But we'd love for you to just expound on that if you could.
Definitely. I guess I should start by saying, just recognizing like the privilege that I also bring to the table, being a cisgendered, able-bodied, man in our society, who then also had the opportunity to go to, well-respected, if not elite, depending on how you think about the world, schools and the privileges that those things have afforded me. So just want to recognize that as well. I think on the race piece, that I've just seen it play out in so many different ways. From it with myself, but also with our fellows. Whether it is people making small comments about how people talk, to how they look, to sort of their, which is all sort of guys under sort of like professionalism. So like, what does the archetype of leadership look like? What does it sound like? And you in those moments, you sort of realize that like diversity just it means sort of swapping out people who have different skin colors, but they want them to act the same way. And I feel like it's just like disrespectful, one, but
yeah.
B, like the power and the value that people of color bring, that women bring to this work is not because of their skin color or their reproductive organs. It is for better, for worse, the perspective on the world that they bring because of those identities, and how they're expressed, given our history as a country, and therefore then the solutions that they bring to the table. One, the letter itself was, I think a response to just a situation that I was facing a couple years ago, and I maybe y'all have been here. I don't know. Maybe your listeners have, where, you sort of write the email and then you're like, I probably shouldn't send that. Not today. You have a couple friends who you send it to, and they walk you off the edge.
Yep.
And then time passes and you just realize it's not worth it. But I think after the George Floyd murder, I just, for some reason, it just that email I had written, 2 years ago, sort of popped back into my mind, and I just thought to myself, there are so many ways that philanthropy has their knee on the neck of organizations of color, and if now is not the time to speak up about these kind of things, then when? And I had gotten distance enough from the experience that it wasn't just about this one thing that, pun intended, broke the camel's back, at that specific time. Because it was like the amalgamation of a lot of experiences. And so I just wanted to put those on the table. One, and two, you sort of linking back to the privilege that I bring, understanding that there was some risk involved, but that also, part of my, I think, responsibility is to try to use the privileges I do have to say the things that other people can't say.
Yep.
So I think about the fellows, the 84 fellows who we've supported over the last 6 years who, are getting started with $40,000. If you're a startup entrepreneur with $40,000 in your pocket, just trying to make it day to day, do you feel like you have the opportunity to say those things?
Yep.
Probably not. And I thought to myself, one of the things that I can do is say the things that they can't say. And there's probably, it's not risk-free for me, but if I can see young people marching in the streets for what they believe in, I can certainly write an article.
Yep. And what has the response been so far, if you don't mind me asking?
I was going to ask the same thing. Thanks for asking.
So far, so good, but it's always hard to tell, Right. Those who love it, are sending me emails and liking it on social media. I haven't seen any nasty gram comments just yet. I can't tell whether that's because we also live in an echo chamber of people who agree with us. And so therefore the people who disagree with me aren't in my echo chamber. I can't tell if it's folks who disagree, but are like, maybe now's not the time to sort of go after a Black leader sort of saying these things. And if they do, that's fine. I think, my wife was saying to me the other day, if you want to do things of consequence, then you have to accept that there are going to be consequences. And so I'm fine with that.
And I'm not a black leader. I'm not a black male leader in the space. I appreciated, not to make light of it, but how you almost use like the last scene of 8 Mile, perhaps, or another metaphor of like exposing all my vulnerabilities. Let me get this out open first about like what you could come at me with, but also like, here's why I'm going to say that anyways, but also how you need to understand what I'm going to say based upon who I am and my experiences. But if you want to try to come at me, here's all the shit you're going to say, but here's what you really need to know. Maybe that's a bad example for calling on a white rapper, but nonetheless, think it's important that you lift that up like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things that I have come to learn and grow more comfortable with about leadership is just, how important vulnerability is in that, for me, at least from my perspective. And I'm still growing in those ways, but I think that oftentimes you feel, or I'll just speak for myself, I feel or have felt as though you need to project this perfection, or you sort of have to hold stuff back. And I feel as though there's something quite liberating about just kind of saying, just about revealing, right? So it's in some ways it's less about the reader or the person listening. It's in terms of like trying to get them to believe something that they should believe or convince them of something. It is me revealing, and then you get to decide what you want to do with that.
Yep. I know we're on the time, so we're going to get you out of here. I think Kelsey's going to ask the first of hopefully the most fun rapid fire questions you've ever experienced in your life.
Go for it.
So what's the most innovative thing, practice, tool that you're seeing right now, or maybe want to see in public education?
I mean, my first thought is one of our fellows this year has an organization called Movers and Shakers. They're using augmented reality to essentially complete the stories that aren't told in history. And so they're starting with monuments.
Wow.
And so they're saying, we can't take down some of these monuments fast enough, but we can build them faster in AR and be able to tell the complete story of Columbus Circle, tell the complete story of pieces that are in museums. And so I just think about what that can mean, for young people learning the totality of history, but also what that means for access. You don't need to live near a fancy museum in New York City to be able to do this. And that to me is really exciting.
Yeah, it's cool. We were just having a conversation with a foundation leader in North Carolina, and similar, but talking about funding groups that were taking down monuments, but then also providing funding for people leading conversation about what happens once now the monuments are gone. Because we can take it down, but there still may be racial tendencies or racist people that are living in the world, and whether they know it or not. But then how do we have productive conversations about what happens after the monuments go down, and also what new monuments need to be erected?
Yep.
This is no longer rapid fire. Share and tell. All right, gonna keep the questions coming. What is one actionable thing that you'd like to leave our audience with that they can do by the end of the week to improve education?
Yeah.
Or world in general?
Yeah, one of the things that and I know that this is a nascent conversation and political views are all over the map. There's this growing discussion around defunding the police. And I'm not telling people where they should be on that spectrum, but one of the things that I have learned in the last couple of weeks is just how much money our cities spend on policing and surveillance as compared to what we spend to support young people. So for instance, in the city of New Orleans, the last general budget, leaving the school system aside, New Orleans spent $196 million approximately on police and surveillance. It spent less than $10 million on youth services. And so I think that one of the most actionable things that, someone listening to this can do is to, petition their local government, to spend more resources on young people as opposed to policing young people.
I have a lot of thoughts that co-sign that. We're in the rapid fire section, so I'm going to practice shutting up. Most important question you'll ever answer in your life, Aaron Walker, what does square pizza remind you of?
School lunch. You know, it reminds me of, and there was this brand of pizza when I was a kid. I think it was called Ilio's.
Okay.
That was a square pizza, and I was a latchkey kid, so I lived on those.
Yep. And so ate at school and then also ate them at the house?
Definitely ate them at home. I was like off and on with school lunch, so I definitely had some at school lunch, but it was a staple of the things I could make at home before my mom came back by
That's
myself.
true. Yeah, that's real. Aaron, man, thanks so much for taking time. Thanks for who you are and all the work you're doing. We're going to link all the good stuff in the show notes so people can check you guys out and support you. But really appreciate you taking time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you.